What's going on, hockey fans? Welcome into the Hockey Hub here on Nesson. Kasey Hudson joined by or alongside Andy Brickley. Brick, it's so weird to call you Andy Brickley. Your name is just too cool. It's disrespectful. Brick, how's it going? How's your week been since we last chatted?
It's been okay. You know, it was nice to get back to the regular business of the National Hockey League after we all enjoyed the Four Nations. But once again, the Bruins leaving points on the table. So it's a little disappointing in that regard, but another opportunity again tonight.
Oh, yes. Not to mention is that they gave us a lot to talk about. So I'm glad I get to partner up with you to break things down. There were some crucial press conferences that took place this weekend. We finally got a little bit more insight as to what Don Sweeney was thinking when it comes to the NHL Trade Deadline. Not too much news when it comes to McAvoy and his injury, but a little bit more clarification on Hampus Lindholm. What was probably the most surprising bit of news that came out of this weekend? Was it the NHL Trade Deadline conversation, or was it Hampus Lindholm probably not joining the team in the regular season?
Yeah, I think it's more the Hampus Lindholm situation. You know, we saw him on the ice several times before the break in the regular season for the Four Nations, and the expectation was that he was getting close, and with a 2-week hiatus and him having an opportunity to continue his recovery and strengthen that kneecap and the leg and the atrophy that accumulates during the injury period, the expectation was he'd be good to go. And then to have a setback, I think that was the most surprising. You know, you were kind of excited that you were going to get your number 2 defenseman back, or 1A defenseman, and McAvoy was going to come off the Four Nations and be on top of his game. And I think there was kind of an optimistic viewpoint, because it's been such a challenging season with their Jekyll and Hyde kind of personality all year long, where they can't get any traction and put a 7-8 game win streak together and get some separation in the standings. So I think the loss of Lindholm for the rest of the year, I think that hurts a real lot, not to minimize the damage that we saw with the Bruins' top defenseman as well, and Charlie McAvoy.
Yeah, and that put a lot into perspective for the team and kind of made some fans nervous as to what to expect. The margin for the race in the East right now is tighter than ever. Rangers trying to gain up on the Boston Bruins, and this is a big 2 points ahead for the versus the Maple Leafs, as you mentioned before. But we're going to get into this and so much more. We also have Eddie Olczyk joining us down the line here on the Hockey Hub. But before we dive in any deeper to all the information that took place, let's take a listen to what Don Sweeney did say about Hampus Lindholm and the injury with the Bruins.
Hampus, unfortunately, is unlikely to return for the rest of the season. As everybody knows, he had a significant knee injury. He fractured his patella, had surgery. There was no real definitive timeline. I think we were pretty open about that, and really didn't want to peg a timeline on it because of the complexity of the injury. He's going to have a follow-up next week to remove a little bit of the hardware because it created some irritation as he was going through the rehab. Again, the healing process has gone long and gone well. He'll have no setbacks moving forward. That being said, it's going to take a little more time for him to heal naturally, and we just don't want to put a timeline on when he'll be back to 100%. So I think it's more constructive to allow him to not continue to push the way he had been pushing, and to let it heal a little more naturally. As far as Charlie, very happy to report that Charlie's doing better out of the hospital, as you saw, in his attendance to the Four Nations, and doing better at home with Kylie and Reese. And again, no timeline as regards to his surgery and his shoulder, but again, doing much better. And we're very grateful and appreciative to Dr. Asmussen and medical staff that took care of Charlie.
All right, so kind of safe to say that we can paint a picture of what the back end of this Bruins defense is going to potentially look like, at least for the next couple of games. But how does this either change or solidify the game in front of Swayman? Because when you have so much movement with your defensive core, how does that impact your goalie? And we need Swayman's best game right now moving forward.
Yeah, it almost seemed like it didn't matter who was behind the bench in terms of the head coach. The entire year has been a challenge for Boston in their own zone, you know. For about a decade, we were so used to those great layers, the great reads, the great handoffs, the ability to keep plays to the outside, to patrol the front of the net, not give up layup goals or screens or deflections. I think the team took great pride in knowing that they were going to be one of the top defensive teams in the league, regardless of who's in the lineup at that particular time, due to whatever, health or sickness or, just roster construction in general. That has not been the case this year, and that's been very very disappointing for this team. And I don't see anything changing for the better when you're not going to have McAvoy and Lindholm in the lineup. It's that simple. You look on that left side. Without Lindholm, a lot falls on the shoulders of a guy like Zadorov. Is he capable of handling 20 to 25 minutes of high-end play, be involved in every situation, both offensively and defensively, be part of that leadership group? That's a lot to handle for a guy that's new to the situation, new to the team, new to the environment, new to the culture. And then after that, it's very little experience in terms of being top players or significant contributors as far as the NHL is concerned. And I'm talking about a guy like Mason Lohrei. He's in that category of young player, drafted, trying to develop, but because of the absence of Lindholm, that learning curve becomes a little bit more exposed. He's higher up in the lineup. He gets tougher challenges, and there's going to be mistakes made, and you're exposed as a young player, and that doesn't help you when you're trying to bank points. And then you have to rely on guys like Wotherspoon and Osterley and Callahan, and at the beginning of the year, I don't think that was the game plan, to be honest with you, but that's the situation that you're in. So a lot on the forward group to help out the D right now. If the Bruins are going to continue to fight for a playoff spot, maybe you alter the way you approach, the way you defend, what you do in the neutral zone to spend less time in the defensive zone. All those things have to be addressed by not only the coaching staff, but the buy-in from the players if they want to continue to compete. Feeling that regardless of what happens in and around this deadline, regardless of who's in the lineup, when you put your skates on, Kasey, and you put your uniform on and you wear that spoke B, it's all about wins and losses, no matter who's in the lineup. And you appeal to their sense of pride and their sense of compete, and that's what you got to hope gets you enough that you get, even if it's loser points, those are okay right now because all points matter.
Every single point. Something I want to continue to unpack, because you mentioned the fact that the forwards are probably going to have a taller task to help out the defense. How's that going to impact points? Two-way games have been very strong in helping teams not only get to the playoffs but compete in the Stanley Cup finals. But sometimes when your focus is too strong on the two-way, you get pinned in your zone, as you just mentioned, and then you kind of let up on the opportunity to find the back of the net yourself. Bruins aren't really sitting at that 3+ goals per game margin. So how can this potentially impact the forward group further?
Well, it starts with the fact that you're probably not going to get a whole lot in terms of generating offense from your back end. Their focus has got to be on defense, and that's their job number one. But all year long, the Bruins haven't gotten much in terms of generating offense and offensive production on the score sheet as relative to other teams that get a lot from the back end and makes their offense a lot more dynamic than what Boston has. So that being said, you'll take the goals from anywhere you can get them across the board, and you'd like to have that secondary scoring. But right now, given the way this team is, the way it's constructed, the way the lineup looks, you're going to have to get your goals from your top guys. It's that simple. Your top six, the way it's lined up right now, with Zach and Lindholm as your 1-2 down the middle. You're going to have to continue to get spectacular production from David Pastrnak. Geeky's got to keep his hot hand. He's been real good. Could have had 3 or 4 goals the other night in the game that they lost to Anaheim. He had that many high danger opportunities and finally tied it late, which was big. You need more from Charlie Coyle if he's going to be in the top 6 playing on the wing. They need Brad Marchand to find his scoring touch. That's where the offense has got to come from. And you'd hope you'd get a little bounce, a little bit from your power play. Even if it's just a timely goal. I don't care if you go 1 for 5 on the power play on a certain night, but it helps you win the hockey game. I'm okay with that. So that's where the offense is going to have to come from. But it's got to be defense first and hope that you have the opportunistic offense, and you hope that Jeremy Swayman is able to not only give you an opportunity every night, but steal some games along the way, because that's what it's going to have to take.
Absolutely. Top guys got to be your top guys, but we know there's still a lot of talent on this roster, which brings us to the conversation of the NHL deadline, as mentioned at the top of the segment here on Hockey Hub. Let's hear what Don Sweeney had to say about potential moves coming towards the NHL deadline.
Well, I think historically we've been pretty aggressive. When our team's been in a position, I think we'll take a much more cautious approach as we approach the deadline. That being said, if there are opportunities to improve our team now and certainly moving forward, whether that's positional shifts or other teams are trying to identify that we may have a strength at, we will look at all opportunities to improve our team now, but more importantly, even moving forward.
Meaning trading away players and trading in players potentially?
Yeah. I mean, it's just stuff that happens during this period of time, and it may plant a seed for the draft and beyond. But there'll be a lot of conversations with people asking, what possible moves we can make. We're just going to take a little more cautious approach in terms of as being aggressive as we have been in the past.
All right, well, last week you and I got a chance to chat. You kind of told us if anything happens, you see more of maybe a blockbuster move in the summertime when the trades are really coming alive. But you just said a moments ago, Brick, getting that secondary scoring. Is there a pathway here that you could foresee where there's an affordable guy to help bolster the bottom six of this roster to get in on some scoring opportunities and help elevate the Boston Bruins roster?
Well, that would only depend on at what cost.
Right.
What are you subtracting in order to add? And when I hear Don Sweeney use that word cautious, and it's relative to exactly what he said, how aggressive they've been in the past. Aggressive in the past because 60 games into the regular seasons, in past seasons, they knew what they had, and what they had was a team, and the numbers, supported this belief was they had a chance to have a deep playoff run. In 60 games or close to it this year, we haven't seen that. We haven't. The eyeball test and all the numbers tell you, and it's hard to get behind this team and say, yeah, we believe, let's add to this team because they have a chance to do something in the postseason. The regular season hasn't told us that. That's not the message that we've received, not only as fans, but as people that cover the team and within the organization itself. So understand what cautious means in this situation. But the other side of that is, can we add to this team with our future in mind? They have a number of pending UFAs. Are they in play? Veteran players that could help Stanley Cup elite teams or contending teams that are looking to add, that have cap space, that have draft capital that you might be interested, or a young player, maybe in the American League, that you earmarked as somebody that you can develop into a really good, bona fide NHL player that can help us win games in the future. All that stuff is on the table, but I don't expect a lot of fireworks from Boston. I don't expect them to go out with the attitude that we're going to add to the current group we have to complement what we have, because that is not the solution, and I think the regular season has told us that. I think the big question mark, and everybody agrees, is what is Brad Marchand's future? Because he's a UFA. They've talked to him. They haven't gotten a deal done. What's his value to the organization? He's certainly earned the right to have what he has in terms of his no movement clauses, no trade clauses within his contract. But what is his future? What does he want it to be? Does he want to extend? Does he want to be with Boston? And then there's the other variable, which is which Bruins players have value to other teams. What are they willing to put in a return? What are they willing to give the Bruins in return for the player that they covet, from the Boston Bruins, if the Bruins are going to be, active with significant players at the deadline. But based on the press conference and the tone and the tenor, it didn't seem like that's the direction Boston was going on. But it was also very clear that it appears they're not going to try to add because, you got your two top defensemen missing, and it's been that kind of a year where you're not convinced that this is a deep playoff run postseason team.
Yeah, definitely a lot to keep base on. Not to mention is that when it comes to the NHL trade deadline, anyone in the hockey community, that is our March Madness. So it's definitely a trend to keep atop of. And if you want to stay on top of the biggest trends in sports, make sure you check out Boston Has Entered the Chat, hosted by George Belleci, Travis Thomas, and myself, Kasey Hudson, available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and wherever else you get and enjoy your podcasts. Now, before we get ready to move along here, Brick, we've got a big 2 points on the line tonight as the Boston Bruins host the Maple Leafs. Maple Leafs pulled off some interesting play over the weekend. As we know that there's going to be a tall task ahead. Now, the biggest thing I look at is the goaltending. If Stolarz is in the pipes for the Maple Leafs, we're going to have to see the Boston Bruins get a little creative in scoring, and they have an opportunity when it comes to picking up some high danger goals and shots. I look to Charlie Coyle here. I look to Pasta here, because that's going to be the way for them to get those bounces in. Stolarz' percentage dips down to about 8.12 to 8.63 when it comes to making those high danger saves. So what do you see the Bruins doing to try to get past the Maple Leafs tonight?
Well, for me, it starts in the defensive zone, even when you talk offense. So, if they can get out of the defensive zone as quick as they possibly can, one pass, even if the pass is in high percentage, then it's off the glass out into the neutral zone, force Toronto to have to regroup to get back into the offensive end. You don't want to have to spend significant time defending in your own zone. It has not been a good formula for Boston this year. They have high-end talent when you talk about Toronto and their top six, or we'll say top three, certainly when you're talking about Matthews, Marner, and Nylander. But, Matthew Nyes is having a good year. Tavares is still dangerous. They're a very good team that likes to score goals, but they have a different mindset this year when you talk about Toronto. They're more committed to the defensive side of the game. They're not an elite. I don't put them in the elite category when I look across the National Hockey League and say this is an odds-on favorite to win the Stanley Cup, but they lead the division because they are committed more to defense. They still have that high-end offensive talent. They like to play with speed. They like to spend time in the offensive zone. They don't waste time coming through center ice and playing east-west game. They're in attack mode. So those are all the things you have to be concerned about when you start thinking about how do we score goals against this Toronto team. They're not great in their own end. Even though they have a better mentality and a better commitment to defense, they're still vulnerable. They still have holes. They're still very beatable. And I think what Boston has been able to do to Toronto, particularly in the postseason, gives them a little bit of planting the seed of doubt when you start to sustain your offensive game and force Toronto to play defense. But again, the other side of that coin, Kasey, is Toronto, last game of the regular season against the Bruins. They see where the Bruins are. They know there's some doubt in Boston's game. They know they're shorthanded on the blue line. They're looking at this as an opportunity to bury the Bruins that have been their nemesis over the last several years. And I think Boston has to be ready for that mentality that the Leafs should have.
Yeah, I'm sure there's still a bad taste in their mouth from playoffs just last year and kind of the narrow dance that they had going on with the Boston Bruins specifically. You touch on the back end. A name that's coming up a lot, and you kind of mentioned him a little bit earlier, is Mason Lohrei. What have you seen out of him and how he can maybe contribute? He picks up a quality amount of shot attempts, needs to kind of land more shots on goal in order to help keep the puck pushing forward, but he had some chances versus the Ducks this previous weekend. What are you seeing out of Lohrei?
He's got great offensive instincts, no doubt about it. He's a converted forward. He hasn't played defense for a very long, a long amount of time in his professional career, certainly. But his offensive instincts inside the blue line, inside the offensive blue line, are good. He's got a nice change of direction. He's got a real good shot. He's got vision. He's willing to take a risk, and sometimes that burns him a little bit. But the offensive instincts are there. He's getting opportunity because of the injuries on the back end. He's getting more situational hockey, more opportunity not only offensively and to be at the top of the umbrella on the first power play, but more of an opportunity to play against tougher talent, which even though it comes with mistakes, in the long run, you hope that helps him learn how to play the game without the puck. Players have to realize that, if you play 25 minutes in a game, you physically only have the puck for about 2 minutes. So the other 23 minutes, you got to know how to play without the puck. And I think he's on that learning curve right now. And, you saw last game, he made a bad decision in the neutral zone. It led to the 2-on-1, the first goal by Zegras. But he's one of your options on the back end, and he might be your best option right now in terms of trying to generate offense. The assists are there. The opportunity is there. I like the way he thinks the game offensively. You just need to see, and you want to accelerate. You want to accelerate the process. I need to see more commitment, more determination, play harder on the puck, play harder through the boards, play harder through hits, defend more sturdily in front of your own goal. All the stuff that young defensemen have to learn how to do when they come into this league. It's just amplified. It's magnified given the situation on the back end for Boston right now. So love the offense. I need more in terms of how to defend if he's going to be the guy that the Bruins fans want him to be.
I love that breakdown. You talk about accelerating someone's play. A number of us have been chatting about Elias Lindholm coming in and being more of a contributing factor on the scoring. Saw him pick up a goal this past weekend. We mentioned high danger opportunities versus Stolarz more specifically can help the Bruins surpass the Maple Leafs in this matchup. Do you think he can have a hand in helping out the Bruins tonight?
I think coming out of the Four Nations is a benefit to a guy like Elias Lindholm. Now, even though his role in the Four Nations for his respective team was, bottom six, defense, win your draws, kill penalties, he wasn't going to be a guy they were looking for offense. But you're playing with the best team. You're playing with the best players in your country on your team, and you're playing best on best. And regardless of what your role is, I think that's a confidence booster. You say, well, how can a guy that's making $7+ million and playing in the National Hockey League, how can he not have the proper amount of confidence when he plays? It happens. It happens. And it's been a challenging year, and it's been a trying year. It's been a year full of expectation and pressure that he hasn't been able to live up to, not only from the fans' point of view and the organization's point of view, but his own point of view and what he expects of himself. And when you're making that kind of money, there is expectation to produce. sometimes people will look and they'll say, they look at the numbers, goals, assists, points, and it doesn't match up with the salary that you're making. Well, when you're in that stratosphere of salary, you have to produce. The numbers have to be there. Otherwise, you're not performing to the capability you need to play at. He does a lot of good things, and I'm not here to defend him and defend his game and say, watch this guy, break down his shifts, look at all the good things he does. People know that. The organization knows it. The coaches know it. But he's required to be more productive. So I'm hoping coming out of the Four Nations, the confidence is higher. He had a good 5-on-3 power play goal the other night, and hopefully being in the top six, not a third-line center, playing in a third-line role with Boston, but in a top six, playing on that first power play, getting his 20 minutes a night, because that's what it's going to require down the stretch. He's got to produce, and we hope that that's the case moving forward.
Absolutely. The path has been paved, so let's see if he can continue to pick up where he left off versus the Ducks and then some. You got a prediction for tonight for Maple Leafs versus the Bruins? Putting you on the spot. Can we grab the 2 points?
Yeah. Anytime the Bruins play the Leafs, I'm taking the Bruins, and it's just simply based on history. This will probably be the most challenging matchup of this regular season for the Boston Bruins, but they have to understand what's in front of them, what's at stake. And not only would 2 points feel good and necessary for the Bruins, it would feel extra good to beat this team with that lineup relative to where your roster is constructed right now.
I know. What better way to say we belong in the playoffs, back in the playoffs, than to surpass a nemesis like the Toronto Maple Leafs. Brick, thank you so much for taking the time, giving your insight, and breaking down so much crucial information for us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.
All right, guys. Well, if you continue to enjoy the Hockey Hub content, make sure that you like and subscribe to Hockey Hub, as well as follow Nesson over at Nesson on all social media platforms. Like I mentioned beforehand, you can like and subscribe to Hockey Hub. You can also check out Hockey Hub on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and wherever else you get and enjoy your podcast. Joining me now here on the Hockey Hub, you might know him as an NHL Hall of Famer, Stanley Cup champion, TNT analyst. One of my favorites that I don't hear enough is author, but more importantly, Eddie Olczyk. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the Hockey Hub here at Nesson. I was just asking you how you're doing. I know it's been a whirlwind of a week physically and emotionally, but again, how's everything going?
Yeah, Kasey, nice to be with you, and thank you very much for having me. Yeah, it's been a real emotional week. I think first and foremost, in my hockey and broadcasting career, it's taken me to the city of Pittsburgh, and I was a player there for 2 years. And then when I retired in 2000, Kasey, I got brought back to Pittsburgh with Fox Sports Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh Penguins, and I got the great opportunity to have a first TV partner in the legendary voice of the Pittsburgh Penguins, the great late Mike Lange, who passed away this week. And it was obviously a very emotional time to have known Mikey and to lose him. I mean, he had been in a battle for a long time, and to get that call last Wednesday, right in between, the preliminary round of Four Nations, which I was in Boston for TNT on Monday, and then obviously the championship game on that Thursday night to get the call. So I was scheduled to be in Pittsburgh on the weekend for a TNT game, the Rangers and Penguins on Sunday. So I was lucky enough to get in there early enough and get in there on Saturday, and was honored to be a part of the on-ice festivities and honoring the late, great Mike Lange. And I could just say to you, Kasey, is that he was a mentor, somebody that took me under his wing, somebody that lasted 46 years in the city of Pittsburgh calling Penguin games. He also did baseball way back when, a Sacramento kid who really didn't know anything about hockey until a little bit later in life, so to speak, and spent some time in Phoenix with the Phoenix Roadrunners, and then worked his way to Pittsburgh. So it's been an emotional week, like you said, a very tough week, but just so happy that I was able to have Mike Lange in my life for as long as I did, and to have been his partner for 3 years, my first TV partner, I certainly will take with me the rest of my life. So my condolences to Mikey's family, to the Penguins, to the city of Pittsburgh. And I said, Kasey, the other day, is that Mike Lange loved Pittsburgh, but he loved the Penguins more. And when you're the voice and be the soundtrack of the Pittsburgh Penguins for 46 years, and 5 Stanley Cups. You've had a hell of a run, and there's no doubt why he is a Hockey Hall of Famer. So, yeah, it's been an emotional week, but going to try to think about the good times and always made each other laugh. So that was something that I will take with me as well.
Yeah, from everything that I've heard, he's given everyone such amazing memories to hold on to and continue to honor, in his memory and whatnot. Robert Healy III said he was sports in Pittsburgh. And you mentioned his journey. I mean, to not come from a hockey background per se and then to become fully ingrained in it, it just shows you how much hockey is growing and, where these voices can come in and make such an imprint and an impression. I got to ask before we move on to anything else, did you have a favorite line? Because he had such great lines. I mean, slap me silly. I think it was slap me silly Sydney. It just stays in the brain. So was there one line that was just like, only him?
I would say probably Great Balls of Fire. I just kind of thought that was quick to the point, and then he would obviously elongate it a little bit, but then he would give the player's name maybe that had scored or what have you. But look, I spent all that time with him, and had known him obviously over the years, and like with great broadcasters, they're magnets, and they're fans, and the organization. With him having all of his sayings, I've been around him a lot, and I'm saying thousands of people would say, hey, why don't you try this, or hey, why don't you try that? And he was always very cordial. But I would say Great Balls of Fire, Mike Lange, the one and only. I would say that's the one that probably, besides seeing him and walking into the TV booth at the old Igloo in Pittsburgh, or PPG Paints Arena now, or any arena in the National Hockey League, KC. The one thing we always did was we made each other laugh, and anytime I could walk into a booth and it would say nothing, and I could just see Mikey just smiling, smiling like a butcher's dog as well. That was one of his coined phrases. But we always made each other laugh, whether we really said anything or not, if that makes any sense. So, but I'll say Great Balls of Fire for the legendary Mike Lange.
I love it. Yeah, it's always just a presence that can do things that are unspeakable. So I think his presence and his impact on the game speaks for itself. And like I mentioned, a journey like his helps grow the sport of hockey. We had a major tournament that just took place with 4 nations. Now, heading into this, it was to replace All-Star Week. So originally, I think everyone was kind of on a lighter note of what 4 nations would become. And then it turned into this beast. It turned into this competitive monster. And everyone was just so hype and excited to represent their country and wear it on their shirt. But what did you make of the 4 nations tournament going into it and what it became?
Yeah, full disclosure, we talked a little bit about TNT when it kind of the format first came out, and then knowing who the 4 nations were going to be, and all of a sudden the teams were set. And having lucky enough to have represented our country at the 84 Winter Olympics, 84, 87, 91 Canada Cups, and 3 World Championships for Team USA. Don't matter the season, doesn't matter the tournament. It's going to be all out, and you're in it to win. And there was no hesitation. I knew, because the hunger for best on best with these NHL players, because remember, this was a joint venture between the NHL and the NHL Players Association. The players have been lobbying for a tournament like this for a long time. I mean, we've been, 10 plus years since we've had the best on best at the disposal of all of these countries. And it just happened to be particularly just 4 countries this time. But I was not surprised with the intensity. I was not surprised with the attitude and the drawing in a line in the sand, especially between Team USA and Team Canada. So I think hockey won. Both host cities, obviously, where you are, Kasey and Boston, did an amazing job. We were there for TNT for the last 2 games of the prelim, which was unbelievable. And just to be a part of it and to see the excitement in the city and the garden and the countries representing the great game of hockey. But then also in Montreal, I mean, they did an amazing job, and it's just so fun. And so I think the game of hockey won, and I think sometimes I think it's gone under the radar a little bit, Kasey, is that this tournament was placed and given to be a little appetizer for what's going to happen a year from now. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the Olympics, where you're going to have the best hockey players in the world from every country qualifying, will be over in Italy playing for a gold medal. And the league hit it out of the park. There is no doubt in my mind. And I think that the league has announced that they're going to do more of this. Now, the next time we have a similar version, Kasey, of Four Nations, I would imagine that it's going to be probably in that 6 to 8 nation face-off. And, to do it right, you're going to have to take probably 2+ weeks off in order to really have a legitimate type of tournament. And when you have a four-team tournament, it can be condensed. There's only going to be the 3 games that each country is going to play, and then you get right into a championship. So if you add a couple, obviously do the math and the days, and you want to make sure you're giving the athletes all this rest. So for me, long-winded, it was more than a grand slam. I think the league hit it out of the park, and look, the players wanted it, and they showed up. And look, there were players that played in this tournament that probably were not 50%, but they found a way to gut it out. Now, I'm sure their teams back in the NHL, and I know obviously, the massive story is Charlie McAvoy, are probably, thinking twice about, a tournament like this, but it's a venture between the league and the players. And look at injuries. Guys can get hurt in practice. They can get hurt in games. They can get hurt at home. They can get hurt in the Four Nations. Is it perfect? No. But I think it's a win-win for the National Hockey League and the game of hockey, not only in North America, Kasey, but throughout the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just to see kind of like new fans that gravitated towards this. It was fun and cool because on social media, you just saw people that were like, this is hockey. Why have I not been watching this? And you can get that joy and intensity, of course, come playoffs. Now, sticking with the injuries for a minute, because that has been the most alarming portion of all of this. And I don't want it to take away from everything Four Nations brought to the table. But what would you say about the turnaround window? Because you had players that had 30, 36 hours to tap back into the mentality of focusing on their hockey club per se. Luckily, you had McDavid that was able to go straight to Philly, but the Edmonton Oilers didn't have a strong performance this weekend. They let up 13 goals in totality. So what would you say about the turnaround window from Four Nations to getting back in the swing of things?
Yeah, I mean, it's not ideal. Let's just call it what it is. But again, the business of the National Hockey League, and there is that fine line, Kasey, right? I mean, you're weighing the tournament, but then also you're walking away from the National Hockey League, the business of this venture, and you go dormant for a couple of weeks. Is that good for the brand? Well, I think what's good for the brand, obviously, is the tournament. So there's the give and take on that, but then also players being off for such a long period of time that aren't participating in the Four Nations. But then to the athletes that are there, get a couple of practices in, go play a couple of games, play some emotional games, and then all of a sudden you're playing in a championship, and then you're right, you're dropping the puck 36 hours later. Look, ideally, would you like to give these guys maybe till Sunday, give them a couple of extra days off, and just try to meet halfway, so to speak? Yes, absolutely. But as we know, and being in the media business as we are, TV drives a lot of what goes on in these sports, and whether it's time starts for games or it is how the schedule is presented and plays out, whether it's regular season or throughout the playoffs. So it wasn't, and it isn't perfect. I don't think there is anything that's perfect, but I think when you do put it all in the blender and you pour it out, I think that it absolutely ends up being a win-win for everybody. Yeah, some teams in the National Hockey League got the short end of the stick, having to play very early on Saturday afternoon, and there was a handful of guys that had to play in those games. But still, is that enough time to have one full day off and then have these guys play on Saturday? If somebody would ask me, I would say absolutely not. But they didn't ask me, Kasey, so I just showed up and did the game on Sunday, and we got the National Hockey League back.
Yeah, well, you know what it's like to grit through situations. At the end of the day, hockey's hockey. We saw players be pulled on to have almost play every other night back after the COVID season. Yeah. I think it was the 52 or 54 games. So they can manage, even with it not being ideal. Now, I need us to kind of put our Nostradamus hat on for a second, because going along the theme of injuries impacting some of these hockey clubs, it's a tight race in the East right now. So now you've got this tango going on between the Maple Leafs and the Panthers. Panthers not having the best news when it comes to Matthew Tkachuk, but this morning it came out that he is expected to participate in the rest of the season at some point. We know McAvoy's out for the Bruins, and they're kind of on the cusp of potentially getting back in a wild card spot. And then you've got teams like the Capitals. They should be rested. They should be fine. They didn't really have players invested in this, and their stretches ahead in the points. How can this kind of mess with what takes place over the course of the next 5 games when it comes to such a close Eastern Conference?
Yeah, I think it is the unknown, right? Because you could have teams come out of this, and look, we've only had a small sample size. You mentioned Edmonton a little while ago. All of a sudden, the Edmonton Oilers were pretty darn good defensively prior to the Four Nations tournament, and here we are, Kasey, and like you said, you've given up 15 in 2 games. So, some teams are going to come out of the break, and they're not going to be phased. That would be the Washington Capitals, who, put up 15 goals themselves in 2 games and won both of those games against Pittsburgh and Edmonton, respectively. So it's how is it going to play out in 6 weeks or 7 weeks from now? I think a lot will have to do with the trade deadline coming up right around the corner, and how teams perform here in the near term. You're right. There is a heavy. It is condensed down at the bottom of the wild card in the Eastern Conference, and who's going to be that team that can get hot, that can turn the corner very quickly. Look at the New York Rangers. Let's talk about them for a second. They get absolutely annihilated in Buffalo. They give up 8 goals on Saturday, and then they come back in a game where they totally dominated for the first 38.5 minutes of the game against the Pittsburgh Penguins yesterday afternoon, and all of a sudden JT Miller takes a shot, and it's a 1-1 game. Igor Shesterkin for the Rangers is playing unbelievable. Miller goes top shelf, and the Rangers have a lead after being outplayed and only having maybe 5 shots for the first 36 minutes of the game. You're going to need games like that if you are the bubble teams that are on the outside looking in, or maybe in the wild card. Detroit, Columbus, they got a big game this weekend at the Stadium Series this coming weekend at the Shoe, outside the rivalry of Michigan and obviously Ohio State, kind of playing to the idea of the Stadium Series there. I will actually be there, Kasey. I'll be working for Sport USA Radio. I'll be doing that game on radio nationally. I get to work with my former partner here in Chicago, the great Pat Foley. We get to do that game on radio. So I'm looking forward to getting there. But, which one of these teams, Columbus, Detroit, the Rangers, the Penguins, the Bruins, which one of these teams is going to be able to go on a run? And will that run be allowed to be sustained once you get near the trade deadline? And then, which way are you trending at that particular time? You mentioned, injuries, right? You've got, you got both Lindholms there with some issues. The last time I checked with the Boston Bruins, obviously you mentioned Charlie McAvoy, you mentioned Matthew Tkachuk, but I know they're more towards the top of the totem pole. How will this affect the general manager's points of view of where they are come trade deadline, or do they sit there and go, you know what, let's cut bait now. Let's try to get some assets here and not really worry whether we finish 9th in the conference or we finish 13th or 14th. Maybe we can beat teams to a punch. So I think it's absolutely wide open, and I will not be shocked to see it come to the last game of the regular season where, a team could maybe be the first wild card, or a team could be out of the playoffs, because I think it's not going to – I don't think there's going to get any separation at the bottom. I think you're going to see teams going up and down, and it's going to be within 1 or 2 points. And, maybe we get the situation, Kasey, where you get to the last game of the regular season for somebody and they got to win in regulation. And then maybe you got to pull the goaltender late in the game in order to get a goal. So there's so many things on the table. And, again, people should not be surprised, because with the 3-point game in the National Hockey League, it's really, really hard to get separation. And the last thing to put a bow on this is that when you dig yourself a hole at some point in the regular season, it is so tough to dig yourself out of it, and you don't want to be where a lot of these teams are, but they still got an opportunity to make the playoffs, because once you get in, you get a hot goaltender. You just never know what the hell can happen come the NHL playoffs.
Yeah, you really start to feel that pressure right about now. What I appreciate, what I'm excited to get your insight on, is you got to wear the hat of an outstanding NHL player. You got to wear the hat of a coach, and now you are doing analytics. Kind of walk me through what the pressure might be like, because taking it to the Bruins locker room, Don Sweeney comes out this weekend and says no big moves really are going to be made by the trade deadline. So they're probably thinking more big picture at this point. But you do have a talented roster here in Boston.
Yeah.
What's that mindset like to keep fighting the fight? You're within a point of your biggest competition, but every point matters from here on out. They have a big 2 that they have to collect tonight versus the Toronto Maple Leafs. So what's that process like to not let that pressure into the locker room?
Well, you can only control what you can. You can't. It's hard not to think about the guys that you don't have and know that you're probably, you can't put a number on it, but you're going to be 25-30% better if you got Charlie McAvoy in the lineup. But it's the next man up mentality, and you have to play. And I do like that. I do feel like the Bruins have that type of roster to make the playoffs, and when they are completely healthy, they do become a dangerous team. They do have very good goaltending in Jeremy Swayman. Sure, if some guys had some down years, absolutely. Well, the reason that the team is battling for a playoff spot is because you've had some guys. You've made some changes, obviously, a lot of changes over the course of the summer. You've had some guys that gotten off to some slow starts, and that doesn't bode well when you dig yourself a hole. And you have some of your most important guys out on the back end, especially Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy on the back end, because you would argue your 2 top defensemen, are out of the lineup. But nobody's going to feel sorry for you. I know Joey Sacco very well. I'm a big fan of Joey, and you just gotta, the lineup that you have, you gotta find the right combinations. You got to be able to find ways to win games a little bit differently when you don't have your best players in the lineup. And sometimes it isn't pretty, but at the end of the day, to your point, every point matters. Doesn't matter who you're playing, and give yourself a chance. Like that, I think that's all you want. You want to give yourself a chance to be able to be in it right at the end. And then also, too, I think around the trade deadline, and respectfully, I know what Donnie Sweeney said, but if somebody comes knocking on your door and really, knocks your door down, he's too good of a hockey guy, or anybody in the National Hockey League, I'd like to think, is going to, you're going to maybe have to think twice about something, or how is that going to affect us not only today, but also how it's going to affect us tomorrow and into the future years. So I think the Bruins, again, if we know what ifs are, and not knowing the situations, especially of what's going on with Charlie more than anybody else, is that, they can get some bodies in there that they're going to give themselves a chance. But the consistency part too has probably been the most concerning. Is how come they can't be as consistent as we've seen them in the past? Well, part of that certainly is the injury aspect, and we'll see if they can find a way to keep scratching and clawing and find themselves within striking distance at the most important time of year, and that's right around the corner.
Absolutely. I try to be an optimist, and I've tried to help Bruins fans realize that at one point in January, they were without McAvoy. The team did pretty all right, so let's see if they can string together some consistency. And plus, when your back end is changing a lot, I know that can put different pressure on your goaltender. Braden Coburn, once upon a time, told me that it changes the communication style between the back end and the goaltender when you've got young guys coming in. You got to simplify everything. You got to minimize everything. It's a lot of adjusting. But we do have a team in the East. It doesn't have to make too much movement. And we've got a watch for Ovechkin to top the great. What do you think is going to take place there? Who comes back from a break and puts up a hat trick?
Yeah. Well, he had an appetizer on Saturday in Pittsburgh. I watched him, and it was one of those battles on Saturday. Like, it just wasn't going for him. His team put up 8, and I don't even think he had a point in Pittsburgh on Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. But you're looking at it. This is one record case that when I looked at it, I was like, well, wow. I mean, is anybody going to ever get to this? And I never thought it would. Like I thought that Mario Lemieux had a chance on the path that he was on, obviously. And look at Mario had back issues. He was battling cancer at one point, but he was on a trajectory to be zeroing in on Gretz's record. And obviously he fell short, but what Alexander Ovechkin has been able to do, and I made this point, I'm going to say probably 8 years ago, that I felt that Alexander Ovechkin really evolved as a player when he became much more selective in his physical confrontation. So if I take a step back, like Ovi's always been the type of player to either try to go around you, go through you, and you run you through the end boards into the third or fourth row whenever the opportunity presented itself. He really never bypassed contact. And I think he realized as he was getting a little bit older that he would be able to save a little bit more energy and conserve some energy if he just was selective. And he didn't get into those heavy battles that he always seemed to be right in the middle of. And you loved him for it. But I think what it's done now with him bypassing contact and being much more selective, there is no doubt in my mind, having played in the league as long as I did for 16 years, is that takes its toll. And he has been so much more selective here, I believe, over the last 8 years or so, that it has allowed him to be a little bit more fresher playing and also on the offensive game and having a little bit more energy. So when you put it all into the, you put it all into the blender again, you get a guy that is obviously dynamic when he shoots the puck. He's dynamic when he is selective on being physical, but he's hungry and his team is hungry. And I think that they set out a goal this year as a team is that they're going to have the best year of their life and they were going to get Ovi as close to or at the record this year. And I think they've rallied around this cry of getting Alexander Ovechkin to become, the greatest goaltender or the greatest goal scorer in the history of the National Hockey League. So to be within an arm's reach now of the great one is just absolutely an unbelievable feat. And this is the story. There is no doubt. I know the Four Nations is still at the forefront for a lot of people, but no doubt in the National Hockey League is when he gets within 3, 4, and 5, this is. I mean, you're talking about greatness. We know he's the great 8, but I mean, this is the ultimate because Wayne Gretzky pretty much has every record, as you know, Kasey, is anyone that's ever played in the National Hockey League, and to see Alexander Ovechkin on the verge is something that I know that I really never thought would happen, and here we are. So. You never say never. I learned that a long time ago, but maybe I just thought that seeing that number of Gretz at 892 all these years is just like, how's anybody going to get there? And here we are, where Ovi is. He's on the doorstep. I don't know if he's knocking on the door yet this year, but he's right there. That's for sure.
That was going to be my question. Do you think that he captures? Does the 8 catch up with the great this season? And do we get a poetic one-timer to seal the deal?
I will promise you this. It will not be an empty net goal.
Thank you. Okay. As long as not.
Just knowing Alexander Ovechkin, a bit, I think he has great admiration and history for the National Hockey League. Is that if he's going to tie it, I think it's going to be on a legit goal. Now, look, a goal is a goal in the NHL. Let's make that perfectly clear. They're all important. But I think for him to tie it, I think there's no doubt it will be with a goaltender in. I'll just say that. It'll be, I don't know how he'll score, but it'll be a goaltender in. And I think whenever that is if he is able to break it, I will, I'm not one of those type of guys that guarantees stuff, but I would be highly disappointed if he broke the record and there wasn't a goaltender physically within about 3 or 4 feet in the net. Now, if a goaltender gets beat out of his hockey pants, Kasey, then that's a different story. But I think you know where I'm going here. I think that it won't be an empty net goal with both goaltenders sitting on the bench for the opponent.
Yeah. Well, I'd go with you on that one because we know that you've got a gear for some gamble with the horse racing background and everything else like that. So honestly, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us here on the Hockey Hub on NESN. Again, I hope that you have a little bit calmer of a week. And again, my condolences with everything you've got going on emotionally and physically. But thank you so much, Eddie.
Thank you so much, Kasey. Appreciate it. Make sure you say hi to Judd and Billy and Brick for me, and we'll look forward to I think I get one more game in Boston, I believe, before the end of the season. So hopefully our paths will cross somewhere down the road. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Hopefully we see you and you bring us some luck here in Boston for more hockey content.
Yes. In the playoffs. Yeah.
That's what we're manifesting. We are manifesting that right now.
Gotcha.
For more hockey content, make sure you're following NESN over at NESN, as well as the Hockey Hub on YouTube on NESN. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Amazon, and more importantly, we'll catch you guys back here next time on the Hockey Hub.